Good. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to take your seats and come to order so we can get going. Good morning. Welcome to the Con Home Marquee. I'm Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to this, our latest event in partnership with OVO Energy. Path to Net Zero, can you save money and the planet? Basically, especially in light of some of the announcements the government's made over the last couple of weeks, I think there is a live question as to whether or not there is an inherent tension between the interests of consumers and keeping bills down and the long-term objective of cleaning the grid. And what our panel is here to do is to explore whether or not that is actually the case, and if it's not the case, how we can find a way to square that circle and do both. Joining me is Robert Batcher, the CEO of OVO Energy, Lord Martin Callanan, the Minister for Energy Efficiency and Green Finance, Laura Sanders, CBE, Chair of the Energy Digitalisation Task Force and the Green Alliance, and Guy Newey, CEO of Energy Systems Catapult. The format, as I'm sure you're familiar, as I'm sure you've all been loyally attending the Conservative Home Events programme by now, we will have opening statements, then I will hijack events for a few minutes to ask my own questions, and then we will kick things out to you. We should have plenty of time for questions, but obviously I will reiterate this, and it's day 3, so I really will keep the questions nice and brief. Right. Thank you very much, and with that, over to you, Roman.
Thank you, Henry, and good morning, all. Let me start by answering the question. The answer is yes. Yes, you can save money and save the planet as well. In fact, it's not a choice. It is an imperative, and we have lots of data from the last 5 or 6 years which shows very clearly that had we stayed on course on things such as insulation, we would have saved 2.8 billion in energy bills in 2022 when our over-reliance on fossil fuel exposed the fragility of our energy system. Yes, so the answer is yes, but what it needs is a very clear policy regulatory framework, private sector innovation within that, and then hand-holding consumers around behavior change. And let me be very clear on the consumer front, which has become a battleground. Poll after poll shows net zero is not a lazy consensus. It is actually a very robust one. But it's also true that people are struggling at the moment with cost of living crisis. And this is where OVO Energy, like large suppliers, need to do a lot more to make sure people can confidently embrace things which will save them money on their bills. Things such as our own energy expert service, which I'll encourage you to explore with Greg in the back, which is a very helpful, friendly, non-EPC sort of compliance service where you figure out how do you go about retrofitting your home. But the answer very clearly is about saving money and saving planet at the same time. It has to come down to expanding renewables, making sure that the connectivity on the grid is seamless, and then removing all sorts of regressive levies which make electrification very hard. If you do all of this and then do not have stop-start on energy efficiency, then we can achieve what is being presented as an artificial trade-off at the moment.
Thank you very much. Martin.
Okay. Yes, I think I essentially agree with the premise of the question that yes, you can, but of course, as in everything in democratic politics, it's complicated. And there are, of course, no easy or simple answers. It's very easy to sit on panels like this one, and I've just been doing many others around with various think tanks and others who have lots of great solutions, and it's very easy, Minister. All you need to do is A, B, and C. But of course, those of us who are no longer elected but have been elected, it's always more complicated in the sort of messy world of democratic politics. But there is a lot that you can do, and actually in the UK we have actually a pretty good record so far. The first thing to say, of course, is that net zero is a legal obligation. Parliament has, rightly or wrongly, has put net zero into domestic law. So ministers such as myself, we have an obligation to deliver on that unless or until Parliament changes its mind on that. And the important thing to emphasise that it's not just a net zero obligation in 2050, there are also a whole series of legally binding carbon budgets leading up to that. So the framers of the original legislation were very clever. They realised that if they just said net zero in 2050, then the politicians in office in about 2045 would start to think, oh dear, we're going to meet this now, and would start to worry about it. Of course, you have to do it well in advance, hence the series of carbon budgets. So we as ministers have a legal obligation to meet that. So far, the journey of decarbonisation in the UK has been very successful. Despite what you might read in certain publications, we are the best performing country in the whole of the G7. Nobody has a better record in terms of reducing emissions than we do. We have met all of the carbon budgets so far. We've actually exceeded the carbon budgets so far. So what the Prime Minister was announcing a couple of weeks ago now was that we still will meet our carbon budgets, and the next one that we're currently planning for is Carbon Budget 6, which starts in 2033. So we have a little bit of time to get the policies in place to do that. We've already identified something like 90% of the policies to meet that. So what he was saying is, as we've already exceeded our existing carbon budgets, then we have a bit of slack to tailor the policies to bring people with us more. And this is again a dilemma that we've faced within the department. How do you convince people to go with you on the journey? And I think you need to do a couple of things. Of course, there are always the zealots who will believe that everything in green is good and that net zero is our overwhelming moral obligation, and that's fine, and we will go with those people. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who don't, and I'm particularly on the Conservative side innately suspicious of anything that sounds green and do-goody. And so I think what you have to do to those people is to appeal to their patriotic side, that whether we like it or not, we can no longer supply the UK's energy needs from the North Sea. It is a declining field, even with the Rosebank licensing decisions. The amount of oil and gas that we get from the North Sea will continue to decline. There are something like 100 fields that are just coming to the end of their useful life. By the end of this decade, we now only get about 40% of our gas supplies from our own reserves in the North Sea. The rest has to be imported. And of course, we saw the consequences of that during the energy crisis following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So for reasons of net zero and reasons of domestic supply resilience, we need to reduce our fossil fuel usage. And as a good capitalist, the reason that I think we should adopt more renewables is because they're cheap. They are the cheapest form of energy. Solar, offshore wind, onshore wind are the cheapest forms of energy now. And therefore, we should adopt as much of them as we possibly can. Now, obviously, the energy experts will say that's great, but they are intermittent. You need backup supplies to that. You need alternatives, which is why we're pursuing nuclear, why we will pursue hydrogen as a long-term energy storage option, so that we can have a mixed grid composed of a number of different elements. The other way that we will meet our objectives is, of course, through energy efficiency. Using less of it. Now, that is good for individual householders. It saves them money. It's good for the nation's energy infrastructure in that the less power we use individually in our buildings, in our industrial processes, that means the country has to finance less power stations, less infrastructure, less power lines, all of the controversial aspects of that. So energy efficiency is part of my job. We're spending about £6.5 billion over this Parliament. Already we've managed to persuade the Treasury to allocate £6 billion for the next Parliament to continue a whole range of the schemes that we currently have in operation, delivering energy efficiency improvements, mainly for those on lower incomes. And again, despite what you read, we are actually making quite good progress. In 2010, something like 14% of homes in the UK were energy performance certificate EPC C or above. Now it's something like 50%. Now, we still have a long way to go, and we still need to make a lot more progress on that, and we will do that. And we're rolling out a number of different schemes, helping people, advice schemes, eligibility checkers, etc., to help in the process of that. Two biggest challenges we have going forward are two things. Firstly, planning. Again, in a democratic society, everybody will tell you that they're all in favour of net zero and it's a great thing and that we should do it, and offshore wind is wonderful and that we should do that as well. but you tell them that actually a consequence of that is that you're going to need some new power lines through your nice village in order to get that power to where it's needed, and suddenly that support drops like a stone. And we have large parts of the country now where we need to put in vital infrastructure that we're running into lots of serious opposition, local authorities, MPs, etc., just because it's difficult and it's a challenge in those areas. And that, of course, is related to the improvements that we need to make to the grid. A lot of our energy supply improvements will be done through electrification, using less gas, electrifying heat, etc. That requires a much more grid infrastructure, and we're running into serious congestion problems in many parts of the grid. We need to fundamentally change it from a system of big power station nodes with power lines radiating out from that, as it was put in the 50s, 60s and 70s, to a much more diversified system of supply. Yes, some big nodes in terms of nuclear stations, but much more smaller scale offshore wind farms, solar farms, individual energy producing supplies, etc., all of which requires a massive amount of investment and a massive amount of change, which of course is always difficult to produce. But we're up for the challenge. We have part of the Prime Minister's announcement was a new spatial plan for energy and for the grid, and we are getting on with reforms to the planning system to try and bring all of those things about.
Thank you. Since planning has been mentioned, I should obviously say that all planning problems are optional. Section 59 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, you can simply authorise any infrastructure project by ministerial fiat without even a vote in Parliament.
Yes, and it gets challenged in the courts. I'm afraid it's not quite
just write it properly.
It's not quite as simple.
It really is.
It really is.
Look, Laura.
Henry, now that is a brilliant
It's one of the
challenge.
most sweeping pieces of legislation on the statute book.
Fantastic, and thank you very
That's
much
worth
for being here. As I think we've all said, I mean, renewables are the cheapest, the most secure, domestically produced energy source that we have. And it really starts to reduce our exposure to Putin's prices, to volatility, which actually is one of the biggest fears for families on low income. So we reduce volatility and we increase security. But can we make this system even cheaper? And personally, I think we can. Now, Martin rightly says, talks about energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is the first fuel. And every time we look at it, it comes actually at the bottom of a list rather than at the top. And we have got to start to understand what the cost hierarchy should be. And energy efficiency must be absolutely front and centre. I'm sorry I was abolished a couple of weeks ago, Martin, but anyway, I'm getting over it. I'm getting over the stress. But secondly, we can also make the system cheaper through better design. Now, Martin also rightly talks about transmission. So what we've got is we've actually built a lot of farms, but we've forgotten to build the roads to these farms, right? So we've got to release more capacity on the system to ensure that we capture all those renewables wherever they are in the country and bring them to demand. The second piece of really important system design is storage, and talked about long duration storage. Actually, if you look at this, and I want to make this analogy, in the food sector, before refrigeration, we lost 60% of food. So what are we talking about? We're talking about refrigeration is the equivalent of energy storage, right? So frozen food is long duration storage, whether that be hydrogen, whether that be liquid air. We've got to get that long duration storage piece in place. EVs is flash freezing. By 2035, we will have the equivalent of 2 nuclear power stations of EV capacity on the system. We must start to unlock that. And the most important part of the food system is actually the fridge in your home. Because if you didn't have a fridge in your home, supermarkets would have to be 4 times the size they are today. So think of storage in the energy sector as a total whole system cost reducer right the way across the board. But the most important thing, and coming back to OVO, and really what we're asking here today about the cost of living, is this system customer-centric enough? And I would say, and have been saying for a long time, it really isn't. What we haven't got is understood that we're moving from in the equivalent of a mainframe system to a PC mobile system. We have got to understand the whole experience of customers and how they're going to go through this transition. The problem we've got is incentives are all in the wrong place. So the retail sector is all designed around, OVO benefits from the amount of energy that I consume, not the experience that I have, not actually the utilization of the energy that I have. And it's not OVO's fault, it's how the system is designed. So it is all designed around consumption rather than outcome. We need to ensure that we've got new business models, so financial service models, where actually I don't have to pay upfront for a heat pump, or I don't have to pay upfront for an EV car, where actually this is in many ways embedded into leasing and long-term contracts. So if at the end of the day we're giving contracts for difference for offshore wind companies, why are we not doing the same for me in a micro sense? Why is, when demand and supply are equal, we should be looking to absolutely unlock these long-term contracts that actually allow me as a customer to both decarbonise, but really, really importantly, to reduce my consumption of energy and use it much more efficiently. So I do hope that we move much more into a service model rather than a commodity sell. And then the very last point really is around vulnerability. And I think that there needs to be a significant review of how we look at vulnerability, what vulnerability actually means, and how we support it. And I think currently we have got a very, very sort of one-size-fits-all. So retail reform and vulnerability reform should be at the heart of making the energy sector absolutely customer-centric rather than system-centric.
Thank you very much. And Guy, over to you.
So I'm going to talk about one of the unsung heroes of energy policy over the last 10, 15 years, who is a chap called Robert Mvine, who's actually wandering around this conference. You'll see him every now, and I imagine once I've told this story, you'll all be running after him like an entourage pretty soon. And so picture the scene. So we're in Policy Exchange in, I think, 2011, 12, something like that. And Rob was one of the researchers in the energy and environment team. And we were writing a report. Policy Exchange were writing a report because they were worried about the cost of subsidies going out of control. Will consumers live with it, particularly the cost of renewables in those points? And it's very refreshing when you hear Martin talk about the success of cost reduction over those 10 years, that we don't actually have those debates anywhere near as much as we used to. So the great minds of Policy Exchange, some of whom now have been in cabinet roles or are ministers or special advisors, etc. For those of you who have ever done a think tank report, the research is quite important. Quite important. The most important thing is the title of the report. So you ideally want a report that gets to the really heart of what you're trying to say. If you can get a pun in, then that's extra points, etc. So we're all sitting around and we're writing this report about, well, we want to decarbonise the economy, we want to go green, but we're worried about the cost of it, etc. What can we call it? And no doubt there's some horrific puns thrown up as suggestions. And Robert said, well, why don't we call the report Greener, Cheaper? Greener, cheaper. That's what we called it, and that's basically how we built a research program over it, etc. And that argument about how do we make green technologies as cheap as possible, so they're rolled out anyway, even if you don't give a toss about climate change, has been a policy challenge since then. I think I would add a subtlety now, because I think when you're talking about renewables, that makes sense. You need to make it cheaper. But when you're talking about offers into people's homes, you're talking about things that affect people's lives, it's actually got to be greener and better, which cheaper is a big part of it. And that's the big challenge that we see going forward. How do we have green offerings which are better, so we don't have to get into political fights about forcing people to do things they don't want to? They're just going, well, that's better. EVs are better. home heating where you don't have damp and drafts and all of those challenges is better. And we've still got a long way to go, but that's the way to think about it. Because in many ways, the Prime Minister's speech rightly got a lot of attention on net zero. But at the heart of it is if you don't take consumers with you on this challenge, then they will just say no, thanks. Because absolutely they've got very high levels of concern about environmental issues, but they've got more concern about keeping themselves warm and reasonable energy bills and all of these great things. And the good news is there is incredible stuff happening, and we at the Energy Systems Catapult work with some of the most exciting innovators in the country, including OVO Energy, but there's a brilliant one about 300 yards that way, which is called Evergreen Energy. One of the things they're doing is coming up with a device that works with a heat pump and just controls it in a way that will take advantage of energy prices going up and down. But you as a consumer don't have to do anything different. You still get the same heating experience. It still works, but you move yourself away from the peak times, which helps deal with some of the system challenges. Greater Manchester itself has just completed a series of local area energy plans, thinking and working with the local community, thinking about serious models of what they actually need to do in this transition. What do they do first, etc.? Because you've had this situation where you've had probably a couple of hundred councils declare climate emergencies, and very few of them with an actual robust plan to do it. That's the kind of thing that is going to attract investment. That's the kind of thing that's going to bring people with you. So it absolutely is happening. The pace of change is absolutely extraordinary over those 10 or 15 years since Rob came up with that little slogan. But the UK should be thinking particularly about where it has strengths. And we have lots of strengths in the upstream technology and the carbon capture, in the nuclear, etc. But one area where we don't talk enough about, and it's probably unfair on Martin and the ministerial team, is our strength in digital capability in the UK across the economy. And the way that energy is finally starting to wake up to the potential of digital technology to improve consumer experiences, to make the grid more efficient, etc., is the way that you unlock that opportunity of good consumer offerings, which people are going to want, not because they just want to be green and be virtuous, but because actually that's better. It's better for my home, it's better for my family, and it's better for my pocket.
Thank you very much. Now, we will shortly be moving to questions, but as the chair, I obviously get to muscle in on proceedings for a little bit first. So one question I want to ask, I imagine I'm going to start with Martin, but I'd be interested in the whole panel's views, is that in all of these ways that we've heard about of green energy being cheaper, the one word we haven't heard much about is abundance. But it strikes me that clean energy is guilt-free energy. So if you have those technologies and you bring them to maturity, you can surely then produce an awful lot of it. Now, that would bring prices down for consumers. The classic slogan, I think, is too cheap to meter. It would bring down unit costs for manufacturing. It might allow new technologies. That's exciting. When I think about that, that's the way that if you're talking about voters who are maybe sceptical about the slightly hair-shirt presentation of net zero. So why is it that we don't really hear much about that side of things, right? There could be a really good high-energy future that's unlocked by greening the grid.
Well, we do. We talk a lot about that, and you're absolutely right. And that's the interesting thing about working in this field, is how the costs of renewables are coming down. And they've come down because of the success of our policies. And that wasn't stuff that was put in place by me, but previous generations of ministers and civil servants came up with the brilliant policy design of the contracts for difference scheme. And what this means is that the problem with rolling out renewables is that you have to invest a lot to build it in the first place. So take example of wind turbines, it's a high capital cost to build it, but once you've got it and once it's connected, it's really cheap to operate. So what you need to do is provide long-term revenue certainty for the people who are installing that, to give them a return on their investment. So the officials came up with the contracts for difference scheme, and that is effectively an auction. And you give an operator a guaranteed price for their electricity for 15 years. If the market price for that electricity is below what they have guaranteed to provide, then they get a subsidy. Or, in the case of, as it's been recently, if the market price is above the CFD strike price, as it's known, then they pay back into the system. And this provides them with the long-term revenue certainty and enables the capital cost to go into installing it. And this has proved massively successful, and so successful that the rest of Europe and large parts of the world are adopting similar models now that we have blazed the trail on. And it's presenting us with supply chain challenges because everybody else is trying to do it with the same companies and the same supply chains. But same thing is happening in solar. Prices coming right down, even in the UK, even in Manchester, believe it or not, with the murky morning that we had there this morning. Solar is, we have as much solar installed in the UK as France. It is one of the cheapest forms of electricity. We're seeing large numbers of applications coming through for big solar farms. Again, not without their planning challenges. But again, it's being done, it's being installed because it is the cheapest form of generation. Now, as was said, it is intermittent, and therefore we need long-term energy storage as well to back up that cheap electricity. But it's perfectly possible to envisage a future where electricity will be very cheap, because once the infrastructure is built and installed, it's actually very cheap to operate.
I was expecting you to say that we couldn't possibly build it because of the planning system, but I think we teed up to that at the end. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a really important point. I think also that actually we've still look at the system being, as I go back to this, a mainframe, a very, very big centralized system. There's some really interesting pilots that are going on, one in Spain with Iberdrola, and what they're doing, a lot of homes obviously have solar panels, and actually the energy for those particular customers is absolutely free. What they're having to pay for is a subscription for storage. So during the day, the energy is taken off and put into a village, a town-based storage, and then in the evening it's taken back into the home. Now, these are very, very different models where actually people are self-generating and everybody is a power station. So once you start to unlock these different business models and you allow them to happen, then you start to get a lot of proliferation of opportunities. I mean, I do have to say, though, yes, we should obviously be excited about the abundancy. There are system costs, so the commodity is going to go significantly down in value, but the whole system costs are going to go up. And you can make the equivalence with data. In 1990, a terabyte of data was $1 million, and today it's 5 cents. Now, whether an electron goes that way or not, I don't know, but we are talking about the system being more expensive, the commodity being very cheap.
Okay. Raman, you wanted to come back in on that?
Yeah, I think you have to look to Australia this year on the back of solar costs plummeting. There is a glimpse of this future of green abundance with 15 days of negative electricity pricing. And that's really a possibility for us. And I agree that the CFD auction system, notwithstanding the latest auction round, which was an obvious case of price discovery, but it has worked, and we are on the cutting edge of expanding offshore wind. We need to continue down that path. I'm sure government will correct that auction pricing mechanism, and we will get back on track undoubtedly. But I think we need to go back to the household end, which is where it's becoming very political. And I agree with Laura, the future around households taking active part in this very decentralized energy system is a reality now. Yeah. In fact, we were the first to do what's still the largest vehicle-to-grid trial, early days of EVs with a Nissan Leaf. And now we've got more than 10,000 connected EVs. You just have to imagine the flexibility system of the future where that proliferates along with battery and solar, and then you've got heat pumps. And then at a household level, you become absolutely neutral, and in fact, you're creating surplus energy which you're selling back to the grid and addressing the intermittency challenge. That's a reality now, and it will be. It is an unstoppable reality in the years to come. Our role as an energy supplier is to facilitate this transition So I'm very pleased that we have announced today, for instance, a market-leading heat pump tariff. Now, heat pumps are, it's a very proven technology right now. We can debate hydrogen and waste our times. But, but for a household, heat pumps provide the most efficient way of heating the homes. And that is 15% of our emissions. The barrier has been the cost of electricity, artificially high because of reliance on gas pricing, marginal cost pricing, as well as policy levies on electricity, which I know we are looking at and hopefully we will be addressing soon. But meanwhile, it's our role as a supplier to take this hassle away from customers. So with the 7,500 grant, a very thankful, much appreciated increase from 5,000, we can not only achieve parity on boilers, on initial investment, but with the cost of run coming down almost £500 cheaper than running a boiler with our Heat Plus tariff, which we have launched today. I think we need clear, decisive signals from policymakers that this is the way to go, and then we have to step in and make this a reality.
Thank you. And Guy?
Yeah, just on the too cheap to meter, which is a great slogan, of course, came from the nuclear industry in the 50s when they were full of optimism that they're going to make nuclear power as so cheap that we wouldn't have to worry about it at all. And the history obviously hasn't quite worked out that. I say that as a big proponent of nuclear power. So we've got to treat those opportunities with scepticism. But you are seeing, to Raman's point, you are seeing solar costs coming down at an extraordinary trajectory, which is not far off, improvements in semiconductors. You've seen it. You've seen with wind, not quite as aggressive, but still extraordinary. You're going to see it with batteries. You're seeing it with, which obviously the key component in EVs, etc. You're seeing fantastic learning rates. So, and we should be aiming for abundant energy. And you know, I totally take the point on you want to make your system as efficient as possible, absolutely. But energy is great. It really is, because living in a not very warm place without electricity, as lots of parts of the world do, is a pretty miserable existence. So absolutely, we should be celebrating getting cheap, abundant energy and aiming for that.
There we go. Excellent. Stop regulating nuclear to death. Right, now, because we're running slightly behind, I'm going to throw the thing open to the floor. We have, I think, 2 microphones. Yes, so we're going to take 2 questions at a time. Please introduce yourselves. If your question is directed to any particular member of the panel, please say so. And to reiterate, please, a couple of sentences and a question mark will do you absolutely fine. We've got a very good panel here. They will get any context. If they don't get the context, you've asked the wrong question. We'll have the lady on the aisle there and the gentleman in the 3rd row here. Thank you.
Hi, Amy Gray from BRE Group. Minister, you acknowledged yesterday that the EPC system as it currently is set up is imperfect. The government is looking at how to reform it. Michael Gove has also said that it needs reform. How would the panel like to see the EPC system evolve, change, be replaced to do what we want such a system to do now?
Excellent. An example to follow in terms of questions. Go.
Hello. Hi, my name is Muyiwa Oki. I'm from the Royal Institute of British Architects. My question is to the Minister as well about planning. What reforms in planning is needed to turbocharge this pathway to zero?
Okay, perfect. So I think we'll go to you, since both of those were directed at you first, but any panellist, of course, should come back in if they want to.
Okay, 2 good questions. So starting with EPCs. The problem with EPCs is that they were originally designed for a pure cost metric. So they were, how much is your home going to cost to run? And it was a very useful metric. But they've since developed into an all-encompassing energy efficiency metric since then. Should we replace them? I suppose the answer would be that we probably wouldn't have started from here if we knew where we wanted to get to originally, but we are where we are, and they've now an established mechanism, and there are millions being issued up and down the country, and lots of retrofit assessors are able to do them. So there are a number of reforms that we're looking at. The first thing is to the underlying software, to get technical, which is called SAP. And in a bizarre world of government, DLUC hold responsibility for EPCs, but my department have SAP, the software that underlines them. So the 2 departments are progressing the reforms together. So we need to look at reforming SAP. We need to get more different technologies onto that, because the measure that's put onto every individual appliance, heat pump, infrared heater, insulation measure, etc., needs to be reformed to keep pace with new technology. So we need to update all of that. We need to perhaps look not so much at the actual cost of running the system, but the actual decarbonisation element of it. Clearly, it's very closely linked to the point that was made about electricity and gas prices. So we have a situation in the UK at the moment where electricity costs per unit of energy about 3 times the cost of gas. And that is not a pure market calculation. That is because various governments in the past, and indeed this one, have placed policy costs as they are known, so warm homes discount, eco, various early stage renewable subsidies, all onto the cost of electricity and nothing onto the cost of gas. That has made electricity uncompetitive compared to gas. So even though heat pumps are 3 times as efficient as gas boilers, the running costs become broadly equal because of the high cost of electricity. Getting off the question slightly, but all linked to the reform of EPC. So there's a whole range of different measures that we need to look at within that. Planning reforms, again, a lot of both big and small changes. We haven't announced yet what we're going to do. There's still a lot of work going on internally between about 3 different departments, DEFRA, ourselves, and DLUC, again, led by my colleague Lee Rowley, but very much at the instigation of the Prime Minister about how we can cut through some of the planning barriers. I really wish it was as simple as just signing a document to authorise something. I sat down with the planning teams in my department last week, and they told me that we are being challenged yet again on the Sizewell C nuclear power station. The courts have allowed yet another judicial review to take place against it. I think I'm right in saying that's the 3rd judicial review that they have allowed onto various aspects of the planning for Sizewell C. Luckily, that's not on the critical path. We can still proceed with the other elements of the design work, etc. But it does add an element of uncertainty into the process. That continues on every aspect of energy infrastructure. Local authorities have their say. Yes, there is a national determination system for large-scale infrastructure. There are national policy statements as well, but they're all held up by various objections as well. We do need to cut through a lot of it. It really isn't just as simple as saying you'd have the
courts, but you'd slice through an awful lot of the planning stuff with the development order.
It's not the same for energy infrastructure.
On the question of EPC, I think it's unhelpful to change the landlord requirement, even though I agree with limitations around EPC, but it's a consistent framework, and using it as a carrot and a stick makes sense when it comes to the renter segment. But the big challenge, which we are finding as EPC is boring. It is a compliance document. You just have to look at an EPC and then you will not act. So this is where we are trying to turn the EPC into something that households can actually engage with and not do a tick box exercise alone. This is where Greg, our energy expert, and multiple Gregs all over the UK are going into people's homes, providing an EPC for free, but then actually translating it into something that is consumer speak and driving engagement, repeat engagement around the top recommendations, which you can then see in the OVO app, along with an energy tracker real-time usage graph. And then we use digital technology to nudge you at the right time to take action. But demystifying it is one of the things that needs to happen. That's not on government, that's on us.
Okay, Laura.
Yeah, so EPCs most certainly do need reform. Currently, if you put a heat pump into your home, your EPC often actually gets worse rather than better. So there are some really quite fundamental anomalies sitting at the heart of it. During the Energy Efficiency Task Force, there was a lot of experts that were talking about building passports, which actually are being deployed other parts of the world. So the technology is there, the assessment process is there as well. I totally agree on Martin's point that you don't want to throw something out, But actually, we do now need to look at how homes perform, not how they're rated. And there's quite a difference there. And to be frank, coming back to, Guy's point about digitalisation and all the rest of it, this should be much, much easier than we've made it. And again, a little bit like the rest of our energy sector, it is 30 years, if not EPCs might be 40 years old. It's perfectly reasonable to say, oh, maybe we need to look at these again. Circumstances have changed. So I would like to see a very significant change. It also, if you ended up with digital performance ratings, you would end up being able to sell energy efficiency services to customers. You'd be able to get the finance behind it, etc. It would unlock a lot of opportunities.
Lovely. And Guy?
So what do people want? First of all, they want lots of Gregs, basically. They want people who are going to hold their hand through this transition journey, because it's complicated in your home. You don't, oh, am I going to need new radiators? Am I going to need insulation? What the hell do all these technologies, etc.? So, and that's a commercial challenge. So, it's great to hear about harnessing the kind of slightly crude EPC output that people get into something that's really useful to them is really important. But the other thing, which is just as important, that doesn't get enough attention, is actually what happens after the measures have been installed, like working out whether things are actually working as they are promised. And that is absolutely essential. It's the way we've installed, gas boilers in this country over the last 20, 30 years, often oversized, often not set up to work in an efficient way, etc., is not short of a scandal, really. And if we do the same with the transition and heat pumps, etc., we will get a bad consumer backlash. Heat pumps, as our research has done, working with OVO, working with the government, has shown work in all types of homes. It's just a heating source. You just have to design it properly. But you need to really think about what the output is. Is it working as efficiently as it should? And we don't put enough attention on that. And that's, again, digital technology can help actually work. So when Raman's installing in someone's house a new heat pump with his great new tariff, etc., should be able to really easily know, is this working as well as it should? Because if it's not, he should be facing redress, right? And that's how you build trust in consumer markets.
Wonderful. Okay, let's have hands again, please. So we'll try and split the room. I'll have the gentleman there in the first row and the lady there in the 6th row. I think I've got that right. Microphones are on their way to you. I'm having to project because of the rain, but... Sir.
Hi there. Can you hear me over the rain? Yeah. Jonathan Leake, I'm the energy editor at the Daily Telegraph. Can you hear me okay?
We're just getting the microphone turned up. There we go.
Okay,
go.
Yeah. So I think this question's primarily for Raman, but and it's what difference would it make to the price of electricity if we took the social levies off, as you've been suggesting? So I think the price of a kilowatt hour average is at about 33p at the moment. If you took the levies off, what would consumers be actually paying after that? And then perhaps to Lord Callanan, how far down the road are you to revising the levies on electricity, and what difference can the government make for consumers?
Thank you. Madam?
Thanks very much. I'm Rachel Solomon-Williams. I'm the Executive Director at the Aldersgate Group. We represent a large number of big household name companies. I want to go back up to the generation end. One of the things that will bring down the cost of installing new energy infrastructure, it's all installed by the private sector. We've heard about the contracts for difference. Is cost of capital and investor confidence in the UK as a place to invest. Members are struggling at the moment with being convinced that the UK government is completely serious about the net zero transition. I know it's very difficult to get that messaging and the nuance across. How can we improve that confidence that the UK is serious about being a destination for renewable generation in future?
Raman, I'll start with you.
Yes, the first one then on levies. So there are two options on levies. One, of course, move them to general taxation. Second, move from electricity to gas with very clear pricing signal on adoption of electrification. The value is a basket of levies, but give or take, that's £200 or so, which you can then impute on £2,000 bill, so 10% roughly. But it depends on which levies exactly, but that's roughly the value.
No.
Yeah, I thought about 10 to 15%, but it does vary a lot. So you're talking warm homes discount, you're talking about the eco system, you're talking about early renewables obligations, etc. There are a number of them. Yeah, you know, we're all grown-ups here. It is money. If it's not on those, they're all long-term contracts or expenditures. If it's not on energy bills, then it goes on to general taxation, and you're into the public expenditure round, and the Treasury would have something to say about this. So we will be issuing a consultation later this year on what's called rebalancing, which is essentially how can we make electricity cheaper and transfer possibly, and it's a consultation, some of those levies over to gas, or possibly some of them onto general taxation, but discussions still need to take place, but it's something we do need to do in the longer term. Let's be clear about this. Nothing is going to happen in the short term, and people's energy bills, gas bills, are already high enough without government adding to the problems of that. So it's very much a long-term policy challenge, but if we are to electrify heat, given the figures I gave you earlier, we do need to make electricity cheaper and gas proportionately more expensive.
Laura.
Yeah, I think the whole tariff structure does need a review, and I think the retail reform consultations that are coming out at the moment, they don't really talk about as much about the tariff structure, and we do need to look at that. There's actually some very interesting models that are going on at the moment around an essential tariff, an essential service, where you would put all those social obligations in, and then tiers above that if you are a higher consumer. And strangely enough, it's been implemented in Dubai, and because nobody wants to get to the next layer of tariff, they're selling a lot of energy efficiency services, and actually total consumption in Dubai has gone down by 4 to 5%, which is a massive whole society productivity gain. So you can use tariffs in a very, very different way from how we're using them today. I think there needs to be a lot more innovation, and also that picks up on the abundance issue, because it's a different sort of system design. On the messaging that came out, actually the substance of the PM's piece was not wildly dramatic, except actually fantastic on the grid liberalisation and how that planning process is going to work. The messaging was pretty full on for investors, and I was talking to a very, very large investor internationally and that evening, and he said, I've been trying to make the case for the UK. After this is going to be much, much more difficult. And if one thinks very clearly about this, about cost of living, every time you create lack of confidence in the capital markets, you're putting 1 to 2% on cost of capital, which translates into 3-4% cost increase for me as a customer. I think we've got to be really, really lean into the investor community and absolutely love them up in a big way for us to be able to unlock capital at the right cost.
Guy?
Yeah, just on the point on levies, it's absolutely understand the political challenges, but right now we're basically subsidising pollution in the way that we organise the costs on bills, and you know, policymakers have really only got 3 tools. They can either regulate stuff, I ban it. Looks like certainly in the domestic space, that's not on the table particularly at the moment. They can get incentives right so that markets do their magic and come up with options, or they can subsidise, and it looks like we're going to do a combination of the 2 things. But getting those incentives right so that OVO and other people in the market say, actually, there's a massive 26 million household decarbonisation market to go after. It's not just going to be people who kind of doing the green virtuous thing. It's going to be, you know, kind of, it's going to be cheaper to run is really important. Rachel, your point on you know, messaging, and I totally do understand that. It was a really interesting question I was having far too late last night about, is this worse than 2015? And those of you around in 2015, lots of people in this room were, which was kind of cut the green crap period. And, you know, we were killing subsidies for everything, you know, bioenergy, onshore wind was obviously banned, or not quite banned, but you know what I mean, solar, etc. It doesn't feel anywhere near, offshore wind was almost killed. In fact, there was a meeting about 300 yards with Oliver Letwin that was quite important in saving it, which I'll write about one day. But it doesn't, it doesn't feel as serious as that. The question is what the signal is, and whether that moves forward. I mean, you know, you've still got a Prime Minister who's saying net zero is really important, there's huge opportunities, etc. That certainly wasn't the case in 2015. So I'm I have to be honest, much more positive on the wider context. You've got to get the messaging right. It's a really difficult balancing act because you've got to bring consumers with you, but it's not quite as doom-laden as I've heard elsewhere.
How fitting that the sun came out during that.
That's right. Yeah.
Since we kicked off a couple of minutes late and you have been a model audience, I'm going to try and risk a final round of questions. Please don't let me down. Keep all the questions brief. We appear to have 2 hands up, which is perfect. So we'll have the gentleman there in the white shirt and the gentleman there with his hand raised. The microphones are coming to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, David from Rockwell. I'm just picking up on the point you made about the policy costings. So if electricity is 3 times the cost of gas, but the policy costs are 10 to 15%, does that mean that if we do want people to save money, we need to do a lot more on the energy efficiency measures that panellists have already talked about?
Okay, and sir?
Guy Senior from Battersea, and actually a Conservative Party member, asking a question here. I live in a solar-powered house, but there are 2 problems. First of all, my current energy supplier pays me, when I export energy, which I will be doing at the moment, 1/20th of what they charge me when I have to get energy from them in the evening. And there is a delay. You have to wait a year after you install solar panels to change energy suppliers, which I'm
now
about
going to ask
do.
you to ask a
so
question.
should we, first of all, reduce that period of time, and secondly put some sort of requirement on energy suppliers to pay a rate that is at least half decent?
Oh, a fascinating question. Well, we're going to go the opposite way because this is essentially going to be closing remarks. So Guy, if you'd like to kick us off.
Well, the reason that you're getting such a terrible tariff is rate is because there's no real market signal of the value you're providing to the system. So one thing we haven't talked about today, which I think is really important, there's a big debate going on, is about much more locational pricing in the energy market, which reflects the physics of this new system where people have power stations on their roofs, etc. So, but they've got to be able to get the benefit for them. But right now, there's no incentive. It just goes in the wash. So, and until that changes, you will be stuck getting it. I'm reluctant to get in a world where government is regulating tariffs anymore. I'd much rather that people were paid for the value of the energy they provide to the system. Yes, on the energy efficiency point, I mean, you know, it's always been a way of saving money. The question, I guess, back to the industry is, you know, why have we got to a stage where with double glazing we don't need to subsidise it? It's kind of people buy it, people have a better experience, people trust it's going to work, but they struggle with energy efficiency, right? Partly that's because they've had subsidies, so there's always been an offer and leaflets come through the floor the whole time, but it's back to proving the savings. If I get Rockwell installed, you show me that it's gonna make a difference, and I actually, you know, feel that, etc. So I think it's a customer experience challenge, not just a shove it in the wall challenge. If I can throw that back at you.
Thank you, Laura.
I think picking up on Guy's point, the whole issue, all of this is about customer experience, and I would say that the energy efficiency supply chain really does now need to move into the 21st century, and actually design. And I think this is an idea from somebody at the Catapult. If I get a kitchen installed, the guy comes with an iPad, or the woman, and says, what colour do you want? We've just mapped it out. This is what it'll look like. Oh, you'd like some new handles, would you? Why are we not looking at retrofit and efficiency using that sort of customer-centric approach? And it is a real problem where the energy sector really finds customers difficult, you know. the dastardly customer that rings up for some service. In many ways, that's exactly the same as our gentleman from Battersea, because fundamentally you are not valued in the system. Picking up on Guy's points, every time you put a demand, a sort of solar panel or an EV car onto the system, you reduce whole system costs. You should benefit from that. That is your contribution, and what you're being given is pennies just to say, to sort of buy you off. So we must make sure that customers are treated equally to generators in the system.
Thank you. Martin?
Yeah, so starting off with the gentleman's very good question about his export tariff. We actually did used to have a system of guaranteed feed-in tariffs, as they were called. That was abolished for a market-led system. So different suppliers will now offer you different rates depending on where your power is and how useful it is to them on the system. But of course, what you've got to remember, in terms of the bill that you receive, that also contains all of the standing charges, which are policy costs, also the cost of the transmission system, the cost of delivering the supply to you, etc., etc. So there are a lot of additional costs on that. But your fundamental point is valid. And picking up, I'm not going to go into the localization issue. It's a live debate at the moment under the what's called the REMA process, the Review of Electricity Market Arrangements, which we're currently looking at. It's very complicated, but very, very important for us to get right. Question on energy efficiency is also really good one. It's one of the big things that we're also grappling with. We do have a lot of subsidy schemes, which I mentioned earlier. But I also think there's a lot we can do in terms of incentives as well. Now, clearly, this is a matter for the Treasury. But why is it that if somebody buys a new property, the first thing they want to do is spend £15,000 to £20,000 on a new kitchen or a new bathroom? That's exciting and interesting and sexy, but you suggest to them they might want to put more loft insulation or, heaven forbid, some exterior wall insulation, which I'm very passionate about, because it's great, and they'll actually save money in the longer term, and they're a bit more reluctant to spend money on that, even though it benefits them much more than a new kitchen or bathroom would in terms of their bills. So there's a bit of a kind of market failure there. So I think there's something that we could do on incentives, and certainly making the case to the Treasury that they could look at some reforms to the stamp duty system, etc. And if they structured them correctly, it could be cost neutral, but they could provide some incentives for people to upgrade and insulate their homes, because it's good for them, but it's also good for the whole system, because we have to put in less infrastructure if homes are more efficient. And we do have the oldest property in Europe. We have 6 million homes that were built before the First World War, so we have the biggest challenge in Europe as well.
And Roman?
Yeah, the question on solar, I'll come to the more prosaic reason, which I can imagine is behind the poor experience. But the philosophical reason is the retail market design is all about a very traditional system, top-down, basis of competition has been race to the bottom pricing for the longest time, and we need to move from that paradigm to innovation, decarbonization, customer-centric, flexible tariff regime. And I think that is underway. It's going slowly. The more tactical hypothesis behind your tariff is, the run costs of implementing the FIT regime are high on suppliers, but it's a competitive market around smart export guarantee. OVO, for instance, if you are with OVO, has a market leading, I think it's 20 is the rate for a SEG, which will beat what's there in the market. But I don't know your particular. Great. At least my team will thank me for doing some real business on the panel. But shifting to energy efficiency, I think that again comes down to the retail system design, where in combination with a broader ecosystem, and ecosystem is a horrible word, but it does matter around homes. Take green finance, for instance. If you are creating a set of conditions for banks where they are held to account on EPC improvements, and they play around with their mortgage rates and also on stamp duty, then you are taking a bit of a question out of people's minds around affordability of energy efficiency. Then if suppliers are going beyond doing boring EPCs to creating customer-centric services, then that would help tremendously. For instance, creating a digital twin model of every single UK home. It's something we are embarking on. We have started that exercise of using data science to model out, to simulate every single UK home. You can do that using EPCs in the first instance, and then enriching that data with other publicly available data, and then capturing our own customers' smart meter data. Once you've done that, then you can actually leave customers with very bespoke recommendations, next best action they can take. This is all possible now, but we need a climate where the signals from government are very clear, decisive, and consistent. Even last year, the energy efficiency messaging in deep, dark winter was a last-minute U-turn from government, a laudable one, to at least tell people around setting their boiler flow temperature. That helps. We will do our bit, but we are one supplier. We need the entire apparatus to go behind this messaging consistently. If we do that, all of this is actually well within our grasps.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We've overrun slightly, but I think it was worth it. We managed to get a deal over the line, which is always nice. Please join me in offering a round of applause to our panel. And speaking as the chair, thank you for an excellent set of questions. When I'm sending people to their What is a Statement awareness course, it will be footage of this event that I will be showing them. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you at future Conservative Home events.
And thank you.
Oh, no, that's fine.